was born when she kissed me. I died when she left me. I lived a few weeks while she loved me. You like it?
Love it. So a few years ago, I saw this movie via Netflix and wanted a copy of my own. But it was somewhere around $50 and $80 on Amazon because it was the DVD equivalent of out of print. And for a while, I was considering it. But then about a year ago, the Criterion Collection released it for $30, not even on Blu-ray, and I bought it and was thankful. This is how good this movie is. In fact, it's my favorite noir film of all time, which is why I suppose I'm going to try and condense all my knowledge and love for it into one single review. In a Lonely Place is a 1950 film based off of a 1947 novel of the same name, starring Humphrey Bogart and Gloria Graham, and is directed by Nicholas Ray. While the book focuses on a serial killer/rapist named Dixon Steele, the movie took some liberties with the source material and changed, well, everything. For instance, Steele is no longer a money-grubbing, mooching murderer, but a down-on-his-luck scriptwriter with some severe anger issues, who is instructed by his agent to turn a book into a script. Wasting no time reading the novel, Dix invites a hatchet girl who did back to his place so she can tell him the plot. Which she does.
And she starts to scream, "Help! Help! Help!"
with great enthusiasm. We'll call her Missy MacGuffin. Why? Because when she's found dead the next day, that's exactly what she becomes, a MacGuffin. As the last person to see her alive, Dix is shoved to the top of the suspects list, and in need of an alibi, asks one of his neighbors to vouch for him, thus introducing the audience to Laurel Gray, as portrayed by Gloria Graham. Laurel Gray is the exact opposite of the MacGuffin.
You know, when you first walked into the police station, I said to myself, there she is, the one that's different. She's not coy or cute or corny.
So, naturally, Dix falls for her. Only keep in mind, we have no idea what Laurel did or didn't see that night, and nothing comes into question more often in this film than just that. But she likes his face and gives him the benefit of the doubt in the form of corroboration. It is at this point that the movie turns into a Nicholas Ray masterpiece of audience manipulation, as the focus shifts from murder mystery to this burgeoning romance. With Laurel at his side, Dixon is inspired, happy, and moving forward in his career, while Laurel fulfills every 1950s archetype for the happy housewife. That is, she's part secretary, mother, and lover, happy to put her plans on hold in order to support his artistic needs, or something. Point is, Humphrey Bogart displays a vulnerability and playfulness that is rarely, if ever, seen on film again, and smacks of a genuine intimacy. However, this wouldn't be a noir flick if it didn't have a dark outlook, if not in the lighting, then in the story itself. Which brings us to the police. In an attempt to drive a wedge between the two and get Laurel to flip against Dix, a Captain Lochner reveals to Laurel Dix's sordid history of violence, which does nothing to discourage her, at first, but does impress upon her that unassuming looks can hide a sociopath, a message she repeatedly receives from the world's creepiest masseuse.
Oh, get out, Angel.
Meanwhile, a seemingly constant police presence begins to fray at Dix's already limited patience. Tensions finally come to a head at a beach party where it's revealed to Dix that Laurel was once again called in for questioning. Hurt that she didn't tell him, Dix wrongfully attributes Laurel's lack of forthcoming to mistrust, rather than attempt to avoid the very scene he's causing. When he storms off in a huff, Laurel follows him behind the wheel of his car, where the following scene seems vaguely familiar. Either way, Dix gets what he wants, which is a fight that unfortunately forces Laurel to play referee. Now, this scene can be read in a multitude of ways, but for the sake of time, I'm only going to present two. One is the way of the writer. That is, this scene's only purpose is to display what we already know about Steele to Laurel in order to progress the plot forward, which it does with plenty of cohesion. Now normally, this is the one that I'd prefer. However, I really like this movie, so I'm willing to go the extra mile to analyze it. Which brings me to interpretation number 2, which comes from the Freudian school of thought on aggression displacement, where anger builds up to such a degree that it needs a release in order for catharsis to occur. Usually that release is dumped on some poor unsuspecting victim rather than the actual source of our anger, like snapping at a friend for something your mother said or punching a pillow rather than your smarmy brother's stupid face. It varies from person to person, but the dynamic is usually the same. Someone else gets hurt for our emotional constipation. In this case, the root cause of Dix's anger is Laurel, which makes this guy, her, in his head. Like or lump my theory, it's just a theory. But it's one that I believe holds water because this pattern of behavior crops up again when Dix punches Mel. But that's not till later. The next day, Dix sends the guy he hospitalized to check for $300 to cover damages, which in today's economy is roughly around $3,000. I guess medical bills were smaller back then.
That's right.
Either way, it's some small measure of recompense, and while the audience is privy to Dix's act of contrition, Laurel is not, which bears reminding because if Laurel had known, her doubts about Dix might have been allayed. But since said doubts aren't, they accumulate and fester in the form of sleepless nights. As a result, she begins to take sleep aids or pills, which doesn't go unnoticed by Dix. But the brain is a funny organ and can ignore obvious signs of distress in order to prolong the illusion and feelings of happiness, especially where love is concerned. And because this is so true to human nature, one would be hard-pressed not to empathize with both parties, where you have one who's desperately afraid and one who's just desperate. It's as sweet as it is horrible, but this is where Nicholas Ray shines as a storyteller. In fact, he's notorious for it. Ray can be seen over and over again giving the audience these wonderful snippets of domestic bliss between his protagonists, only to yank the rug out from underneath them by playing upon the character's foibles. So when we see Dix wring his hands to propose marriage, the audience feels the awkward tension so much more, because not only are we privy to Laurel's fears, but it's compounded by our visceral knowledge of how happy they once were. Back when their body language was more open, relaxed, and playful, a far cry from what we see here, which is distant, tense, and fraught with doubt. Still, the show must go on, and so does this movie. For approximately 20 more minutes, we see Laurel plotting her escape, Dix's reaction, and the final scene, between all of which is Mel, Dix's agent. Mel occupies a unique role in this film, in that he's its audience member. That is, he knows of Dix's temper, yet sees his contrition. Loves Laurel's influence, but understands her fear, which is why he's willing to help her, and himself, by delivering Dix's completed script to the studio.
If Dix has success, he doesn't need anything else.
Unfortunately, this plan backfires spectacularly when an old flame of Dix's joins their engagement party and asks for a role in his film. It's important to note that Dix has been noticing discrepancies of behavior between Laurel and Mel all day, but has ignored them in favor of his own happiness, all of which comes to a crashing halt when it's made clear that his script has been purloined. When Laurel tries to intercede on Mel's behalf, Dix ignores her culpability in favor of blaming Mel, which makes sense. After all, Mel is dependent on Dix for an income, whereas Laurel is not. In fact, she makes that explicitly clear earlier in the film when she says what she would do without him.
I'll go back to Chicago and be a Fuller Brush girl. They were crazy about my work on the near North Side.
So, following my theory of aggression displacement, Mel is a safer target in Dix's mind because he's more likely to forgive him than Laurel. Which is no excuse for how he treats him, but it does play nicely on an often overlooked aspect of this film, which is that Dix was a soldier. Now, I'm not saying he has PTSD or anything, because the symptoms don't fit, but perhaps a predisposition towards anger that was then exacerbated by the necessities of war. Because if you listen carefully...
February 1946, beer parlor brawl on Santa Monica Boulevard. March 1947, had fist fight with his producer, fractured producer's jaw. June 22nd, 11 p.m., Frances Randolph screams for help. Charges Steele beat her up, then denies having made the charge.
None of these outbursts precede World War II. Now, this could just be a writer's oversight, but this film has very little waste. Everything gets used. So after they introduce Brub as an old army buddy...
How long have you known Mr. Steele?
He was my CO. We spent 3 years together overseas.
I have to ask, why do they keep bringing it up? What function does this serve?
You're an ex-GI. You know judo. You know how to kill a person without using your hands. You haven't written a hit since before the war.
He hasn't stopped working all night. He hasn't left the house in days. Won't even take me for a drive.
Incredible. You know, Dix hasn't been able to work like this since before the war.
I'll admit, this is speculation on my part, but it's about on par with others that I've read in doing research for this review. Anyway, back to the movie. Laurel flees, leaving Dix to face no consequences whatsoever. Hell, he doesn't even apologize. In fact, Dix never apologizes. Instead, he buys his way out, circumnavigating any real repercussions that could have curtailed his unacceptable behavior because, let's face it, without ramifications, there is no impetus to change. All of which culminates when he goes back to Laurel's, finds her packing, and his reaction is terrifying. Partly because the buildup was so well done. Just 5 minutes of pure emotional agony. Fortunately, the phone rings and drags Dix out of his rage, allowing us to see that Laurel isn't dead. But the relationship is. The ringing is like a symbolic death knell. To spell it out even further, we have Captain Lochner on the line who tells Laurel that Dix was totally right about the MacGuffin's boyfriend. He was the killer all along. Still, Dix lingers at the door, almost like he's waiting to hear her press charges against him, and what he gets instead shatters any hope he may have had of reconciliation.
Yesterday, this would have meant so much to us. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all.
Watch this, Lise. You can actually pinpoint the second when his heart rips in half. And now.
And so it ends with this beautiful shot of him walking out the door and through the archway, highlighting that the lonely place is what anger condemns us to when it rules supreme. So while it may feel euphoric, it's not worth romanticizing, making this a fairly honest film where relationships are concerned. Still, the impact hits because this movie is a rare combination of good writing, good directing, and good acting, all working in tandem to elevate it to great. And a lot of that credit has to be given to Nicholas Ray, because when the movie was greenlit, there was a lot of debate about who would play a Laurel, and while Bogey pushed for Bacall, it was given to Graham, mostly because Bacall was tied up with Warner's contracts. But I believe Ray knew his wife well enough that given the opportunity, she would rise to the occasion and make this role her own, which she did. Hell, I'd even go so far as to say that her acting was better than Bogart's. Then again, Ray did rewrite most of the script to fit Graham's speech pattern, so it's a bit of an unfair advantage. However, if you believe this is favoritism, think again. There was a lot of behind-the-scenes chaos going on in that marriage. For instance, Graham and Ray were going through one of their many separations. Why? Well, he was a drunken gambler with a jealous streak and she was pretty promiscuous, but their drama never interfered with their work. No one on set knew that they were estranged because they were consummate professionals. Still, just in case something like this did occur, the studios forced Graham to sign a spouse contract so degrading that it practically ordered her to shut up and look pretty. Fortunately, it never came to that because they still had love and dedication for their work. Before this movie, Graham was stuck in bit roles that really didn't display her versatility, whereas Ray was an established director, but a bit of an iconoclast, always shaking his fist at the Hollywood system, which shows up plenty in this film.
Everybody makes flops except you. You haven't had one because you've made and remade the same picture for the last 20 years. You know what you are? You're a popcorn salesman.
Yet, despite the subtext, In a Lonely Place was also Ray and Graham's goodbye to each other. A testament to the respect that is showcased beautifully in this ending. Because while the script called for Dix to kill Laurel, Ray didn't like it. So, as legend has it, he kicked everybody off set and with the skeleton crew improvised the final cut. And what we see is not typical of Hollywood noir.
The original ending we had written so that it was all tied up into a very neat package, with Frank Lovejoy coming in and arresting him as he was writing the last lines, having killed Gloria. And I said, what shit. I can't do it. I just can't do it. Romances don't have to end that way. Marriages don't have to end that way. They don't have to end in violence, for Christ's sake, you know.
I do. But to say an assault isn't violent just because there wasn't a death is absurd. Otherwise, Ray's right. This film wouldn't have been anywhere near as devastating had Dix murdered Laurel. By subverting audience expectations, the ending stays true to the film's theme, that loneliness is a self-inflicted condition when the person stays a slave to anger, making this and the rest of it one of the best movies I've ever seen. So, now that I've gone over the good, I guess it's time for me to review the bad. She wears makeup to bed.
Did you not laugh?
Yep, that's it. That's all I've got.